Bringing people together. Crossing divides.
BBC Newcastle, radio for the North East.
Yes, if you were listening yesterday, you'll know that this week we're crossing divides all week on BBC Newcastle. Every day we're bringing together people with opposing views on some of the big topics splitting society.
Yeah, so today we're going to chat about cannabis and whether or not it should be legalised. Well, joining us in the studio is Simpa Carter, who's from the Durham City Cannabis Club, who would like to open a cannabis cafe in the city, and Simon Stevens, who's from Addiction UK. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming in so early this morning.
Good morning, Anna.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alfie.
So I guess we'll start with you, Simon. Just tell us some of the effects that you've seen on cannabis users in your line of work.
Okay, so I don't have a strong opinion as to whether it should be legalised or not legalised. My concern is a lack of information about cannabis harms. Just like there are alcohol harms. I mean, alcohol's a legal substance for cultural reasons. Whether it be legal if it was new today would be a whole different story. And it's accompanied with lots of harms. So is cannabis. A significant minority of people are affected with cannabis. And it's just not the newer strands of cannabis either. There's some very interesting research coming out of Australia, for example, that's linking cannabinoids, which previously were thought to be a positive aspect. And it's suggesting maybe that that's not so positive as well. So there's a lot more research to be done into this area.
Ultimately, I do have a strong opinion on whether it should be legalised. Ultimately, I believe the best way to reduce these harms, the potential harms of cannabis, is to legalise and regulate it. To prevent youth consumption, obviously, our club, when it's open, you will have to show ID. You'll have to be an adult. As an adult, in a free society, you get to choose what you consume. Same with alcohol, which is comorbid in a multitude of illnesses, far more than the preliminary research coming out from that side of the world. New Zealand are also doing a study on this about IQ. I take great umbrance to the biased nature of the research. Cannabis is actually one of the most studied plants in the world. In the 70s, Keith Stroup, who founded Normal in America, he quoted 20,000 studies. Since then, I would argue there's been at least another 5,000. The question we have is whether we are asking unbiased questions about cannabis. The predominant amount of studies coming are suggesting whether cannabis is harmful. We need to find out what cannabis does.
Would you accept, though, that there are certainly some mental health implications for certain people?
Correlation doesn't equal causation. We've discovered this with a multitude of other drugs in the past before.
I have to actually interrupt there. There was a great argument that cigarettes didn't cause cancer, and the cigarette companies all said correlation does not equal cause and effect. So I'm afraid that that's a very poor argument to put forward. And as for research being biased, well, if the research doesn't suit you, you say the research is biased. The research is carried out by thousands of different individuals. They can't all be biased.
No, they're not, but ultimately the question that is being posed is cannabis harmful? That is the majority of the studies are asking whether it's harmful, not how it affects the people. You've also got to remember that cannabis in the entirety of human history, we've been utilising this substance industrially and as an adult intoxicant for at least 30,000 years according to archaeological evidence. In that time period, there has not been one single death.
Well, obviously we can't say that. And simply because you might say cannabis is not poisonous doesn't mean to say it doesn't result in deaths, obviously. For example, there are many studies that clearly show that cannabis intoxication and its effect on your ability to perceive space and time exists longer than 24 hours after consuming even small amounts of cannabis. I certainly wouldn't want my children to be driven to school in a bus driven by somebody who's been smoking cannabis.
Simpa?
I wouldn't want my children driven to school in a bus that the driver has consumed alcohol.
But would you want them to drive a bus that
if he'd consumed it the night before, I would have no problem to this. As we're seeing in Canada, America, Israel, places that have legalised and are doing unbiased research, are discovering that cannabis intoxication is somewhere between 2 to 4 hours when consumed orally. Obviously,
that's finding it in the bloodstream. It still continues to affect brain function long after 24 to 48 hours afterwards. That is a scientific fact.
I would like to see the research on this after the debate, and would like to continue this.
Would legalising cannabis help keep a lid on the strongest strains of marijuana, Simon?
I have no strong opinion on whether it should be legalised or not. We could say we have legalised alcohol, but there's also a large amount of illegal alcohol too. It's all to do with distribution and costs as Kurt, distribution. Illegal alcohol is popular because it's cheaper than legal alcohol, because it doesn't attract all the costs that are necessary to support that kind of, what might you call it, sort of restrictions within it. So it's always going to have a competitive advantage.
Simpa, what benefits would you see in legalising cannabis?
Well, like I say, as we've seen in Colorado, in Washington, cannabis use is at a 20-year low because it's legalised. It's simply not cool. A teenager doesn't want to smoke weed. My dad smokes weed. I don't want to do that. So the police officers that I'm working with at Durham Constabulary as part of community coaching in my local area, they're saying they don't find the teenagers with alcohol. They don't find them with cannabis. They're finding them with cocaine. These are the serious issues that we've got. We're chucking cannabis into the pile of all of these drugs and associating the extremities of the harms of certain Class A's with cannabis. And I think we need to deconflate this argument to be able to actually ascertain what substances cause what harm within society.
Is it a fair association, do you think, Simon, that?
I would always argue, and I would look too, that why in society do we have this issue that effectively people want to turn off a major part of their brain, which is what all drugs do, including cannabis.
Escapism.
So what is so wrong with our society that you want to temporarily damage your brain? And in that sense, that's where I come from with cannabis. That's where I come from with cocaine or alcohol. And there's a whole other range of behaviours. I'm not telling people what they should do. I'm simply wanting to say, for a significant minority of people, this causes very serious harm.
Now, this is crossing divides, so can you see any merit in what each other is saying here?
I understand and empathise entirely with the opposition. Addiction is something that is close to my heart. I've struggled with it myself. I have a multitude of friends. And I agree with the point that Simon has just made, that drugs and certain behaviours are a form of escapism. Our society is sick. We are 10 years into Tory austerity, budget cuts galore. There is nothing for people to actually do. The prosperity in the youth is falling off a cliff. I look out of my window into the street beside me and I see that youth struggling. You were just talking about knife crime. You want to tackle knife crime? You want to tackle violence in schools? We legalise cannabis. We end the war on drugs and we utilise billions of pounds each year. We get back the 50,000 policing staff members that have been lost in 10 years of austerity. And we actually start to repair this country rather than demonising the youth for the substances they're choosing to consume as a form of escapism from a society that is vicious, in my opinion.
Simon?
Well, I've just got to say there that, to try and tie this to one side of a political argument is naive. Drug use, increasing drug use, has coexisted alongside industrialisation. There have been the Tories, the Whigs,
Use,
the Liberals.
not abuse.
Well, that's, you're saying use, not abuse. Anybody in my book, and I come from a background of somebody who has suffered from mental illness problems because of the use of cannabis. Use, abuse, well, they're the same word, effectively. If it's causing you harm, then, and it causes a significant number of people harm, and to say putting it, and saying it's not a harmful thing is really being, it's just not being very honest.
Gentlemen, time's up. That's it, the end of the round. Thank you so much for chatting with us on Crossing Divides.
Thanks very much, Alfie. Thanks very much, Anna.
Thank you. That's Simpa Carter from Durham City Cannabis Club and Simon Stevens and the Shaking Hands from Addiction UK North East. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? Join in, please.